Today, we're going to talk about a guy who faced near-fatal crashes, devastating wars, and catastrophic earthquakes, and somehow came out on the other side, having built one of the most recognized brands on the entire planet. This is the incredible story of Soichiro Honda. But before we get into all the cars and the motorcycles, I really want you to think about this question. Because for Soichiro Honda, failure wasn't just some obstacle he had to get over. No, for him, it was the entire blueprint for his success. And that blueprint? Well, it didn't start in some fancy boardroom. It started in a tiny village in rural Japan, where a young boy's obsession with machines would end up charting the course for his entire life. You know, Soichiro was actually a terrible student. School just could not hold his attention. But at his grandfather's rice mill, that's where he found his real education. He was just totally mesmerized by the petroleum-powered motor they used. The rhythmic sound, the smell of the fuel, the little puff of smoke. To him, it was pure magic. Then, when he was just 11 years old, it happened. The moment that defined everything. He saw his very first car on a dusty country road. He was so spellbound, he just started running after it. When it finally stopped, he knelt down, saw a single drop of leaked oil on the ground, and he inhaled the scent. And right there, in that instant, he made a promise to himself. One day, he was going to build his own. Now, that childhood promise would be tested in ways he could never, ever have imagined. His journey from a boy with a dream to a man with a global empire was paved with one brutal, soul-crushing setback after another. So at 14, he drops out of school and moves to Tokyo for what he thinks is a dream job at a garage. But the reality? It was a nightmare. For months, all he did was clean floors and babysit the owner's kid. He wasn't even allowed to touch the cars. He was so close to quitting, but then disaster struck. The 1923 Great Kanto earthquake leveled a huge part of Japan. Most of the other mechanics just left, and suddenly the garage had no choice but to let Soichiro work. It's an unbelievable turn of events, and it really shows you the first major theme of his life. What looks like a total catastrophe can actually be a huge opportunity. And wouldn't you know it, he was a natural. He quickly became the best mechanic they had, and his love for engines pushed him into racing. He started building his own race cars and even became a champion. But just fixing and racing cars, that wasn't enough. He wanted to create the parts themselves. So, with literally zero manufacturing experience, he decides to start a company to build piston rings. The results were, well, predictably catastrophic. He burned through all of his savings and even had to sell his wife's jewelry to keep the lights on. But still, every single ring he made was a failure. So what does he do? At 31 years old, he humbles himself, enrolls in high school, and learns the science he was missing. And 2 years later, he finally nailed it. Just as he was getting his feet under him as an industrialist, his other passion almost killed him. A horrific racing crash left him with a fractured wrist, a dislocated shoulder, and a badly injured face. Just like that, his racing career was over. He recovered and poured everything back into his factory, only to have it bombed by American fighter jets during World War II. Most of his business, everything he'd worked for, was turned to rubble. And as if that wasn't enough, just as he was starting to rebuild from the ashes of the war, a massive earthquake in 1945 strikes the region and completely destroys what little was left of his plant. It was the final blow. So after a decade of tireless work, a racing career, building a company from absolutely nothing, surviving a war and an earthquake, he was left with zero. He sold the scraps of his factory for pennies, and for the second time in his life had to start completely over from scratch. But it's from this absolute rock bottom, this point of having nothing, that Soichiro Honda comes up with the single greatest idea of his entire life. An idea that wasn't born from ambition, but from pure necessity. So to get what he does next, you really have to picture a post-war Japan. The country was devastated. There was no fuel, no public transport, and definitely no cars. The bicycle was king. Then one day, Honda finds a surplus generator engine, the kind the army used to power radios, and he has this light bulb moment. What if? What if he could attach this tiny engine to a bicycle? He bought up 500 of these little engines and started strapping them to bikes. This new motorcycle was an instant hit. But he hit two problems fast. He was running out of engines, and gas was incredibly expensive. So he just designed his own, better engine, one that could run on a cheap fuel mix made from pine resin. And in doing so, he basically created affordable transportation for a nation that desperately needed it.
This tiny little bicycle engine company grew at a staggering rate. And pretty soon, Honda wasn't just helping rebuild Japan. He set his sights on conquering the world. And he started with the toughest market of them all, America.
He took everything he had learned, and in 1958, he released his masterpiece, the Honda Super Cub. It was cheap, it was reliable, and it was so easy to ride that it completely took over the Japanese market. But the next challenge was America. How could this friendly little two-wheeler possibly compete in a country where motorcycles meant outlaw biker gangs?
Their solution was pure marketing genius, captured in one of the most brilliant advertising slogans of all time. This single sentence didn't just sell a product, it completely re-engineered an entire culture's idea of what a motorcycle could be.
The strategy was just brilliant. They put ads in magazines like Life and Look, not some niche motorhead journal. They showed regular people, students, couples, families, just using their bikes for fun. And get this, they never, ever used the word motorcycle. They were selling a lifestyle, not just a machine. And it worked. By 1973, they had captured 43% of the entire U.S. market.
So Honda had conquered the two-wheeled world, but he still hadn't forgotten that promise he made to himself as a kid on that dusty road. It was finally time to build a car.
His first few tries were actually commercial failures. But then an opportunity showed up, and once again, it was disguised as a crisis. The U.S. passed the Clean Air Act, which demanded radically lower emissions. The big American automakers completely panicked and sued the government. But Soichiro Honda, he saw it differently. While they were busy hiring lawyers, he was busy hiring engineers. His team developed something called the CVCC engine. Now, this thing was an engineering marvel. It met the strict new pollution standards without needing an expensive, clunky catalytic converter, which was the clumsy solution all the other car makers were forced to use. The result was the Honda Civic, a car that was cheaper, more fuel-efficient, and cleaner than anything else on the road. It took the American market by storm and established Honda as a global automotive giant. And that brings us right back to where we started, from a poor student to a global icon. Soichiro Honda's whole life proves this one powerful idea. Every single disaster, the crashes, the bombs, the earthquakes, the failed businesses, they weren't the end of the story. They were his education.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Look at the challenges and the setbacks that you faced. What if, like Soichiro Honda, you saw them not as something to be ashamed of, but as the raw material for your greatest success? What problem could you solve today using the lessons you learned from yesterday?